oops, for Easter, so I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this. And before we get into it, I always like to start off with a bit of housekeeping. So we do sometimes touch on sensitive subjects, and if you are experiencing any kind of emotional or mental triggers that are bringing up difficult memories for you, we do have a trauma therapist on hand who'd be more than willing to assist you with a 15-minute debrief session. And on top of that, we also have a hotline list in the perks section. So if you do need an extra element of support, we are there for you. Just let us know in the comments or send me a message and we'll do what we can to make sure you're helped and looked after. So with that said, I would love to know what you guys have all thought of the summit so far. Any feedback, any opinions, any notes or favorite panel events or anything else like that. I'm always open to feedback, and yeah, I would just love to know how you found it. And the other element that I thought I'd mention as well is we do have one more event this evening, which is sort of like my wrap-up talk about career recovery in general. So if you'd like to jump onto that as well, you will, it's a similar sort of scenario where anyone who engages with us live by asking questions or inviting a friend on to join as well, you'll go into the running to win a handful of prizes, including some books in relation to personal development or career progression, and then also there's a 90-minute session with me. So that's in regards to toxic workplace culture, how to overcome it, and everything else. So with that said, I'm very excited to introduce you to this wonderful woman. Let me just bring up the bio, because as always, as I'm sure you've noticed with all these speakers, there's an incredible background and it's just worth explaining it in more depth. So, as a social media strategist on Envision's editorial team and the founder and creative director of Muse Avenue, an online community encouraging inclusivity and career opportunities, her professional strengths lie in creative direction, campaign strategy, branding, content creation, and her personal interests include everything from fashion to illustration to empowering creatives from minority backgrounds. And you can find her featured in the New York Times and Girlboss, which, by the way, I love, for her style and entrepreneurial creativity. So what better person than to come on board and give us a bit of insight into how to create a more inclusive and diverse community and culture within the workplace. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course, thank you for having me.
So I have sort of prefaced every conversation with just a little touch on toxic workplace culture. What has your background been in this field? Have you experienced toxic workplace culture, and how has that maybe led to your current position?
Yeah, honestly, I don't know one person who hasn't, unfortunately. And I am a part of that group of people who have experienced workplace or toxic workplace culture. It just kind of feels like it's like a part of the experience, like the corporate experience at this point, no matter where you go. But fortunately, I haven't experienced anything toxic for a while, which is great. But one experience that I can kind of like dive into that really stuck with me for a while is just this past company that I used to work at. My manager particularly was a bit toxic and didn't really communicate much, kind of kept me in the dark a lot. And one particular instance, so we're from completely different backgrounds. And so I understand anybody who's from a different background than me might not know much about like what it's like anything about like being a Muslim or being of color or Black, right? And so I always try to like any questions that come my way, I always try to like approach it in a way where it's like from a place of understanding and curiosity rather than like a toxic place. And so, but this particular instance was a lot more on the toxic side than out of curiosity. So it pertained to like my hijab, my scarf. And my manager at the time made a few remarks about it and like asked me questions about whether or not I can wear like a winter hat with my scarf. Which I just laughed about because I was like, yeah, of course, like why not? But I thought, okay, like he doesn't know, like so this is fine, right? But then the next day it was winter, so the next day I came in with like a hat on, not because of that comment, just because it was cold outside. And he was like, oh, are you just wearing that in spite of what I said? And I was like, no, this is starting to get awkward. Yeah, so anyways, that particular comment, it made me feel uncomfortable because now it kind of felt like he was making remarks about like who I am. Like I'm like the type of person that would like go out of my way to try to hurt someone based on a comment that I laughed about and thought it was just okay, whatever. So that was like really awkward, and like we sat right next to each other. So that made it even more awkward because it just felt like there was tension after that. And so I just addressed it in like a one-on-one meeting. And when I brought it up, it was just kind of like, oh no, that's not what I meant. Like like it just like, but the people around us at the moment when those two instances happened, like they even felt uncomfortable and came up to me afterwards. So that was like a really awkward moment, but also like a learning lesson for that manager as well. So
yeah, I think so. And it's so nice that you say like it's always important to start something with an element of curiosity rather than sort of harboring previous experiences you've had and assuming it's going to be in the next position, because I think that's when we get into that trap of almost carrying on that toxic cycle, irrelevant of where we go, what we encounter. And yes, it is everywhere, there's no doubt about that, but how we approach it can be different. So it's really optimistic and refreshing to hear you lead with that element as well.
Yeah, 100%.
So one of the reasons why I was so excited to have you on board to this summit was because we recently, well, it feels like forever ago now, but we recently had International Women's Day. And one of the things that came up for me in regards to this was the fact that, we were always promoting women and equality and all this other stuff, but in Australia, most of the panelists were white women who were fairly privileged, very comfy in their environments, and it's this whole, we take one step forward in one direction of, inclusivity and everything else, but then we still have such a long way to go when it comes to really implementing that element of diversity and allowing an environment where everyone can have a voice. So with that said, I would love to know what are some key elements to cultivating an inclusive culture at work based on your experience?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think for me, like you said, a lot of companies, and I've seen, I mean, I've heard this said so many times where it's just like, oh, like we have diversity, we have women, and it's like, that's not where it ends. And even when you do have those diverse people in your company, like what exactly are you doing to make them feel welcomed and supported, and how are you providing them with equity, right? So those are the type of things that I'm always thinking about. I'm not a manager by any means, but I just, as a person of color, a Muslim woman, like triple minority, I'm always thinking about how we can be more inclusive and diverse. And so one thing that I particularly like to do is just like pass on the baton. I got into a company, it's like, okay, let me help my community somehow. Maybe like, for example, for Black History Month, I wrote an article about so I work in the design industry, so how the design industry needs to be more inclusive of the Black design community. And I particularly noted the fact that a lot of panels, events, companies in general, when they're hiring, they will only ever like look at Black designers, particularly for diversity and inclusivity initiatives, and not for their areas of expertise. So that's something I was talking about as well, is like that it's like to basically be more inclusive of and include these voices in different areas rather than D&I. And then also another thing that I try to do within that article is make it resource-based. So I was mentioning all of the different designers that like our industry should know about. all of the different resources created by Black design professionals like that are out there that, you know, you could partner with, for example. And then also some stories that were written about these designers. So it's such a simple thing to do. Just like it's just a resource-based article, right? But that basically led to like a whole domino effect of like, you know, people reading it, and then the Black design community felt appreciated, obviously, but then also other professionals within the industry were now like looking at that particular article to find Black designers to like feature. Like they basically, there's no longer an ability to say, oh, I don't know where to go, where to look for these diverse voices. And so even within our company, we started to, like my colleagues started to use that as a resource. So that was pretty awesome. So yeah, that's just one example, but also just like being aware that it is hard work, you know, like diverse inclusivity doesn't end with just hiring somebody. It's always like having that one-on-one communication with your team and making sure that like everybody feels comfortable and included and like supported. And it just starts with a conversation most of the time. Like you'll be surprised. Anytime someone from our HR department asks me like, hey, like how can I help make sure that this is like a space that feels comfortable for you, I will always mention something like, I'll be like, oh, like, you know, it would be nice if we had a prayer room, because I do pray like 5 times a day. And it's like, okay, let's go and make one of the boardrooms like a space for you. And maybe we'll put the times that you need to pray so people know not to use it at that time. Like just something as simple as that will make someone feel so appreciated and like, and welcomed. So.
And much more, it encourages that element of belonging as well. So it's like, different backgrounds, it's all like there's room for everyone.
Exactly.
And I you went back to this element of communication and having that ongoing conversation with different people, because that popped up in basically every single one of the panel speakers that we've had so far. But it goes to show just how powerful it is to be able to maintain that conversation and to encourage this kind of
even like one last example that I have is like our office manager at an old company I used to work at, like we used to have a lot of like lunch and learns, or just like lunches in general that the office would order for us, which was awesome. But instead of just like assuming that everybody's going to eat like the same kinds of food, like she would go around and ask every single person, like maybe through Slack or something, and just be like, if you have dietary restrictions, or you know, you only eat like halal meat or kosher meat or something like that, like let me know so that I can order you specifically a plate. And I never had a problem at that company when it came to like food. I personally I'm not a vegetarian, but I do eat halal meat. So if there's no halal meat options, I'm now a vegetarian by default. And so it's kind of sucks when you can't eat like the type of food that you want, because you weren't really included in that conversation initially at your workplace. But when you are included, now you're eating like everybody else, like you're happy, you know? So just something as simple as that.
And I think like you said, that until you mentioned it, that would have never occurred to me. But it's such a big difference in how everyone approaches things. So I really appreciate that too. So with that said, as a creative and equality advocate, I would love to know a bit more about, because you're, as you said, like a designer yourself, and I'd love to know a bit more about how you think creativity can play a key role in encouraging this kind of inclusivity and diversity across the board, and how like collaboration might be one of the key steps.
Yeah. I mean, something as simple as like what you're doing right now, getting different voices together on a panel, that's so important. I'm even like right now with Muse Avenue, I was a bit inspired by you, so thank you. But we're doing like an Instagram live sessions all about like self-care, really in relation to like this whole pandemic that's occurring right now. And so I'm just getting a few different voices within our community on and collaborating with them to see like how we can help our communities together. So yeah, collaboration is super duper important because the voices you normally wouldn't hear, you are now hearing from. Or I think there's still a lot of power in pen and paper or like articles and stuff like that. Like being able to feature different voices as well is really important. Even you know, like within your own company, like Lunch and Learns, I always feel like it's the same people. I don't know why, but like I feel like once like a company has like a roster of particular people that they invited once, they just keep inviting the same people.
Yeah.
And so like kind of looking at that I guess roster of people and saying, okay, like how can we like switch this up so we're hearing from different people from different communities. That goes a long way as well. But yeah, I think in terms of creativity, collaboration is definitely one of the best ways to do that.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that because I also come from a relatively creative background, and I think one of the things that really pops up for me is that whole idea of following a purpose. So if everyone's on board with the mission or with the thing that you're creating and or with the project, you end up taking the ego out and just focusing on what's actually the best method to make this happen. And I think it creates this really wonderful space for different voices to chip in and have, and because it's not really about, it's almost like those elements fade away and it's purely about something that you're trying to produce or make happen. So
exactly,
nice to create that kind of environment as well.
Yeah, for sure. And like one other thing that I just remembered is when it comes to serving a particular community that like maybe your team within your community or company doesn't really understand. So for example, like if your company is targeting like Indigenous community, but there's like no Indigenous people on your team, first of all, like get an Indigenous person on your team. But if you can't immediately, I think one of the best things to do is like hire someone as a consultant from that community to make sure that the messaging and everything is like accurate. Because how many times have we seen like marketing initiatives, campaigns just going downhill because there was no one on that team that understood that community. And so definitely being able to not just collaborate like for things like this, but also like if you are looking to expand your reach and target, for example, like with us, we were targeting the Black design community, right? Like I'm a Black designer. So obviously having someone like me on the team, like to not speak for them, but just give some kind of perspective is really important. But if you don't have that, then getting someone as a consultant or a freelancer or just hiring them permanently, like, you know, that definitely goes a long way.
I think so as well. And cultural appropriation is still an ongoing thing. I mean, the other day there was like an example that happened in like the high fashion end, and it's just we see it all the time in every sector. And I think that a lot of that comes from, like you said, just not enabling the people to have those conversations in the first place, and then by the time it gets to, you know, cleared and it's out in public, and it's too late by that stage.
It's too late, and everybody always is wondering like, where was the person that was supposed to stop this from coming out? It's such an obvious, but sometimes it's not when you're within it. Like it's like groupthink, you know, everybody's thinking the same way and it's great, but it's gets to the larger audience and it's like, no, that's not it. That's not okay. Yeah.
So along with that, let me just have a look. Yeah, so there's this whole thing, and this touches on it really well. There's this whole thing of like ticking the diversity box, and just having a list or like a column somewhere that says we have 2 people, and therefore, you know, we have done our job, and you know,
yes.
But it's so much more nuanced, and like you said, it's an ongoing conversation, and it's just it's nowhere near as simple as just saying it's done and calling it a day.
Exactly.
I'd love to know other ways that you've maybe like amplified the community or promoted these conversations around inclusivity, and tried to make this more like, instead of just a one-off day where we're like, oh, we've done Inclusivity Day, you know,
Yeah.
go, making it this like daily integration.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I feel like that happens so often in terms of like tokenism. Like like you said, what you get one person and that's enough.
Mm-hmm.
But it's never enough because at the end of the day, as someone who has been tokenized multiple times, like you just feel so uncomfortable after a while and like so unappreciated and like you're being used. And so
Mm-hmm.
you end up leaving the company or whatever project. Um, and trying to find something better, hopefully. So that's one thing that like I think companies need to be aware of is like that strategy will always fail, like always. It may not fail within the first month or 2 months. Maybe it takes a year because you know you have to build up your career capital as like an individual, but it will
Yeah.
fail at some point. In terms of combating it, I think definitely looking at individuals less as like a diversity token and more as like, okay, we're going to go and equally like if we are in the search of hiring someone, for example, and we'll search in different places. So I feel like a lot of companies will do the same like posting their job postings in the same place. They'll go to the same recruiting events every single time and then wonder why nobody of a diverse background is applying. So I think one thing that needs to be done is switching up like where exactly you are looking for talent. For example, if you're within the tech industry, there's like a huge tech conference called Afrotech in Oakland, California, in the States. And they basically have like 10,000 like Black professionals from all walks of life, like working for all types of companies, Google, Facebook, like you name it, they're everywhere. And I went like last year, and it was such an interesting it was so interesting seeing what companies were there and which ones weren't. And like if you can't make it there, obviously like not every company has a huge budget to be able to go to every conference. So I think kind of partnering with them and partnering with a conference like that, but in a digital perspective. So maybe like you're posting on their website or something, is so important because now you are taking that step towards like, I'm going to get out of this whole like quota perspective when it comes to hiring and just searching in all types of different communities so that we do get a diverse pool. And then looking at that diverse pool from a perspective of who's the most qualified. Like one thing I cannot stand is being chosen just because I'm a Black Muslim woman. I get so mad about that because I have a brain and I'm like an expert in my field, and I'd rather be chosen for my creativity and my expertise rather than like just because I fit that box for you and you can just check it off. So definitely looking in all types of areas and then choosing based on who's the most qualified. And then when it comes, I feel like there's two sides to this question. So there's the whole hiring the hiring side, but then there's also like the side of it where it's like campaign based. And so for me, when it comes to both my full-time job as well as like Muse Avenue, when I'm looking to feature someone on social media, for example, or I'm looking to feature them on my site, like through stories that I'm sharing and stuff like that, I always try to make sure like, okay, like let's look back at all the different types of people that we've like featured in the past, and then see like what voices are missing. And then on top of that, like which voices are important to be shared at this moment. Maybe it's International Women's Day, so obviously like more female voices, but then also remembering that you don't need a day to feature women or to feature Black people or to feature Spanish people. Like I think making sure that you're taking all of that creative juices that you come up with during like these special days. So for example, like International Women's Day, I'm like, and trying to figure out like a camp or content calendar throughout the whole year to make sure those people are still being included. So those are the kind of the two things I always think about.
That's hopeful. That's really helpful. In that way, it's not just like a one-off, one and done decision. It's sort of like this ongoing.
Yeah. And it's authentic then, rather than just like coming in and saying, yep, okay, we did International Women's Day. Okay, we did Black History Month. You know, like all these special days, it's like, no, like your audience knows when you're being fake at the end of the day. And so a company, like for me, Glossier, for example, is so authentic. Like they're always showcasing women in such a diverse manner. You'll see people, women of all different types, shades, like different religious backgrounds, different ethnicities, and it's all year round. It's not just, oh, it's not International Muslim Women's Day, so we're only going to feature Muslim women on this day. You know, like you see them all year round, so it's pretty awesome.
Integrated as part of their brand and their values and the message that they try to share. Yeah, the whole as a completely side note, but they had that whole dilemma about releasing like a glitter palette, and everyone like lost it because it wasn't like in line with this like element of sustainability and everything else. It was just really funny to see that when you build like a strong brand or a strong community, you attract a particular type of response that can be really uplifting and positive, and that's essentially the power of creating these kind of inclusive communities.
Exactly.
So with that said, I think part of the risk of or part of the concerns that people may have with even starting this conversation is that whole element around fear. No one wants to be deemed as racist. No one wants to say something, and there's all these barriers that society kind of places that say, you know, either say it right or don't say it at all. And so people just kind of tiptoe around the subject, and then it's not really making any progress. And it is so difficult to kind of like walk that line. And I think you touched on it briefly before, but that element of curiosity is so important, because then you're going in with an open mind and you're creating these spaces where it is okay to kind of like learn and discover something new, and you know, admit that maybe you didn't have all the answers, or that you didn't address it in the best way, but at least allowing that conversation to start in the first place. So with that said, how do you generally promote a safe environment to discuss these things?
Yeah, no, that's such a good point and good question. I think the only thing that can eliminate fear when it comes to this stuff is like education, like educating yourself on that particular topic, educating yourself on that community. And if you are not of the community, then like I said, getting some kind of like expert help, not just like picking a random person from the community, but like an expert that actually understands. And then if that's not possible, then actually going out and doing like market research, like focus groups, interviews, surveys, something, so that you can understand. But at the end of the day, it goes back to like eliminating the fear while using education of some sort and research. And so I think that's super important. I feel like we already, in terms of marketing, like we already do that, but for our core target market. And then the minute you want to expand out of that, it's like, I don't know what to do, right? But it's the same thing. It's the same process. You're just starting from scratch. And so that's like, I think definitely one of the biggest things. And then again, like going back to like hiring a consultant or a freelancer of some sort to help you understand. Because like we both mentioned, like there's nothing worse than assuming things about a community and then later on finding out once it's like public that was the wrong assumption.
Having worked in like the film and TV industry, I cannot say how often I like see a Hollywood film and just be frustrated beyond frustration at this.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, it doesn't even need to be touched on because it's still that backwards, but
it's still just bad. Yeah.
I kind of like weird in today's world. Like it's crazy, but people just soak it up because they're so used to seeing it. So it's become
exactly
just like, I mean,
exactly. Yeah. It's like a running joke at this point. Like, for like for me as a Muslim woman, now there's a lot more like Muslim woman characters in TV shows. And like every time I watch these shows, I'm like, oh God, like it's the same narrative every single time. And I'm like, if they just hired a Muslim person to help them with this,
Yeah.
like they would get so much depth out of that character, but it's always the same thing over and over again. Same with like, I'm also Somali, and like Captain Phillips from that one movie, I forget what it was called. I think that's what it's called, the movie Captain Phillips or something.
Yeah.
I don't know what it was called. Tom Hanks is in it, but
Okay.
it was so bad. I was watching that and I was like, this is not reflective of my country, my community at all. But everybody thinks it's like that's what it is because that's all you see, right? And so definitely just having that person or people from that community to help you, because I think everybody wants to see themselves on TV or featured somewhere, but in the right light. And so definitely education, research.
Yeah. There's
Very
this really
important.
quote, I can't remember who said it, but it's something like, you can't be what you can't see. So it's this whole thing
Yes.
of, if we're not seeing leaders with different nationalities and backgrounds and everything else,
Mm-hmm.
then we don't, it's so much harder to imagine ourselves in those shoes. So without
Exactly.
representation, whether that is in media or just simply like in an office space or even in a day-to-day environment,
Mm-hmm.
it creates like hidden barriers without even realizing it. So
Yeah,
reaching that early on is so essential.
for sure.
So with that said, what are some challenges that Muslim women face when entering the workforce, for those of us who are blissfully ignorant to the truth of our feelings?
Yeah, no worries. I feel like there's a lot of challenges for sure. Um, one, uh, One easy one I think that people might not be aware of is like not having the right network. Just because like a lot of us are first generation, whatever country. So for me, Canadian. And so we basically like our parents brought us here as immigrants, and all of a sudden now we have to start from scratch, right? And so those like kind of networks that are like someone who is like native to this country or probably not native, but is like kind of has been here for generations. Like their parents would have like the right network to connect you with, like if you're about to graduate, oh yeah, I know someone at Pepsi, let me connect you. We don't have that. A
Mhm.
lot of us don't have that. I can't speak for everyone, but most of the people that Muslim women that I know don't have that. And so navigating like the career industry, or what am I saying? Career industry, it's kind of late. But navigating different kinds of industries, especially the creative industry, the tech industry, is so difficult if you don't have the right connections. And so just getting your foot in the door is so hard.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing that I try to combat with Muse Avenue, my platform, is to get these girls to come out to more networking events and like meet people, and like encouraging them to like, you know, like add someone on LinkedIn, and like the proper steps to get that coffee date and just like learn more about that particular career path or that industry, and get that connection in like the most authentic manner. That those are things that we weren't even taught how to do. It's something that I had to learn the hard way on my own. And once I learned it, I was like, okay, like let me help my community to do the same. But so that's just one like challenge. Another challenge, once you get in the door, it's like I said, I don't know many women who haven't experienced some kind of toxic work environment. And that is like a big statement when it comes to Muslim women, particularly because normally we're not seen in the work, or like we're not seen in like corporate America or corporate Canada or wherever you are in the world. And so most of the time we are tokenized. Like for example, for me, I was asked at some point at a past company, I was asked to be a part of like a marketing video as an employee, but everybody else within that video was like a client essentially. But because they didn't have a client that was that looked like me, like a Muslim woman or Black woman, they were like, okay, like you just pretend and you join. And I was like, no, you're just tokenizing me again, you know? And so just but that's such an awkward thing to say no to, because like you're saying no to your boss.
Yeah.
And then I was asked again, like I was asked twice to be a part of that. And it was just such an awkward moment. And so like little things like that are such a challenge, like from day to day. And then just like, I don't know, like I feel like for a lot of like women, they're like basically trying to go against the glass ceiling, or
Yeah.
that's like what their challenge is.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like for us it's like a glass, like, or not a glass, but it's like a wall, like a brick wall, like that you need to bring a drill to get through, because most of the time, like for this community, it's like we're working super hard. We're also working super hard when it comes to diversity and inclusivity. Like most of the time that burden falls on people of a diverse background, right? Like, oh, you're passionate about it, so you take that on for our company. And so like you essentially almost always have like two jobs at the company. And then once you're like, okay, I've been here for a year, where am I going? It's like, oh, you know what? You could just wait it out. You haven't been here for long enough. Like you get those kind of conversations. Like at a company that I worked at before, when I mentioned that I was there for like a year, and it was like my exit interview because I was moving on to something else. But the exit interview was with the CEO, and he was like, so why, like if you communicated all these issues to me before, I would have helped you fix it. And I said, okay, well, let's say hypothetically, if I wasn't moving on, where do you see me going within this company? And he couldn't even answer it. Yeah. And he was basically telling me before that I was such an asset to the company. But if I'm such an asset, how come I don't have a growth plan here? Yeah. And so a lot of the times, like, I know it's not just Muslim women, this issue, but a lot of the times, like Muslim women, like will be like one of the last people to be even thought of, like for promotion, or be thought of for, like, you know, we're almost always just thought of for things related to diverse inclusivity and stuff like that, but nothing outside of that. So it's a bit of a challenge, but you know.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Unfortunately, yeah, it's frustrating to hear how common that is. And it just goes back to that whole element of tokenism and everything else. But it is really inspiring to see that, like, if you are, for whatever reason, given that opportunity, you do reach out a hand and sort of become a mentor for the next generation, so you can start changing over time and accumulating more people who can essentially share the burden of encouraging this conversation, so it's not always just you needing to be the sole representation. That's so important, because it's a massive task that you've kindly like helped address, but it shouldn't just be you having this conversation. So
exactly,
like created a community about that as well. So in relation to that, I also wanted to ask, yes, mostly in regards to Muse Avenue. So for those of you who haven't had a look yet, there's this amazing Instagram page and some events that will hopefully be up and running as soon as everything goes back to normal, or whatever the new normal is. But Muse Avenue, essentially, through Muse Avenue, you've been able to interview so many incredible women from a whole range of different backgrounds and experience levels and career paths. I'd love to know if you've noticed sort of like commonalities between the women you've selected, or if there's been some sort of like underlining strengths that have revealed itself over time, like of the ones who have been selected. Do they have a similar story of how they got there, or do they have a similar kind of like personality trait, or a way of thinking that we can all kind of consider for our own lives and also encourage?
I definitely try to feature different types of women and their stories, but one thing that I have noticed is that a lot of them are firstly like working on their own thing of some sort. So whether they're like an influencer or an entrepreneur or, you know, just started some kind of initiative or a movement of their own. I definitely try to feature those types of women who are kind of like, I guess you consider self-made. And then women who are actively like trying to share their learnings, their key learnings, whether it's through a blog post or they start a podcast or it's just through their Instagram page, but they're people who are looking to help the community as well. And then also women who are completely authentic and like honest about their journey. So it's not just like, oh, I'm successful, but it's like, okay, this is how I got to where I am. It wasn't like a linear trajectory. It was like a mess, but I'm here to share you like the things that I've learned. And I also try to showcase more like Muslim women who are kind of at a higher level within their career path, whether it's like their own project or within like the corporate world. But the reason why is so that like the women who are reading their stories or, you know, watching them on a live or something, they can like look at them and be like, oh, okay, I can actually get to that level as well. Like I see myself represented, and if she can do it, I can do it. And so those are the types of women that I try to feature. And so far, I mean, I always say this and I'm super honest about it. Like a lot of the people that I feature, I'm like crushing on them. Like I want to learn from them. And so it's like such a huge learning for me. And then of course, like helpful for my community as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it sort of, it sets aside any expectations that it puts everyone on an even playing field in the sense that there's always something new to learn. There's always opportunities to that are out there. It's just a matter of like knowing how to approach that and encourage that kind of open approach. So it's really interesting to hear that you very much made this a reality through your platform.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess along with that as well, I mean, we touched on it briefly, this whole idea of like breaking the triple glass ceiling. So for me, I have the one glass ceiling, and like with the whole
hopefully that won't be a thing in the near future.
Yeah. And there's this whole thing like, you know, the raging white feminists of the world are like complaining that they have the hardest time and everything else, and it's like, well, hang on a second. As you said, like the glass ceiling versus like the brick wall, it's just a whole other playing field. So in saying that, I would love to know on your take on how women in positions of power who have the ability to make a change could be encouraging a variety of voices.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's such a good question. All your questions have been amazing, but I think definitely being an ally, rather than rather than assuming like everybody has the same story as you. It's like, okay, like how exactly can I help you, like if we're within the same company, or being aware of the fact that like I said before, like kind of like looking at the types of people that are within your company or being featured, or that you're just like kind of like working with. For example, like if you're working with a bunch of writers for like your blog or something, like looking at who are these people and like how can we make sure that different voices are heard. And like again, that goes back to doing your own research, like kind of auditing yourself essentially, and looking at exactly what kind of voices you've been outputting, and then making sure that there's new voices there. How do you find those new voices? There are so many different like platforms and resources, again, that you would kind of have to research. But there's definitely, I don't think there's one community that doesn't have some kind of platform at this point in 2020. So it's just a little bit of research and then kind of like, again, collaborating and partnering with them if need be, to make sure that like those voices are heard properly and authentically. So to go back, like kind of backtrack a little bit, like I think allyship for me, it looks like you're listening more than you're speaking, number one. And so if you do encounter someone of a different background, like listening to their voice, like listen to their story, and coming from a place of understanding, is really important. And then number two, making it a part of like your process. So I feel like I can't speak for all types of like job positions or whatever. I can speak for mine. So like for me, I do a lot of campaigns, like social media campaigns. So I'm always looking for people to feature from within the design community. And so reevaluating that process of how you go from an idea to a finished product and like the type of voices that are being heard is really important. Like if I am new to the company and I get like a list of influencers that we usually use, for example, it's like, okay, how diverse is this list? And if it's not that diverse, re kind of configuring that that list so that it does become diverse. And again, that's work, right? That's extra work for you. But being an ally means that you're willing to take on that extra work. And like the same thing for someone in HR. Again, are you always going to the same events for recruitment purposes? If so, reconfigure that list of events and make sure that you are going to Afrotech or I don't know, like there's a bunch of different events out there that have a bunch of different communities or represent different communities. And yeah, so I think it's definitely listen more than you speak, audit yourself, and make sure that you do your research to find those individuals from different communities, and then reconfiguring your process to include them.
And that's such an important takeaway. I love that you've just laid it out in 3 clear, bite-sized
Yeah,
things.
I'm sorry. My brain is always all over the place. So I feel like I was like, let me just summarize it for you guys.
That's like me as well. So I'm sure everyone
Yeah.
can appreciate that. So with that said, there's a lot of ingrained bias, which has been touched on already in previous panel events, but I feel like it's even more prevalent for today. So bias doesn't really excuse behavior, but it is a natural part of our instincts. And I think that how we identify our own privilege is so important, because essentially, I mean, I think it comes down to that whole element of self-awareness. So it's easy to see what we don't have. It's easy to see like what we want, but it's not necessarily easy to put ourselves in someone else's shoes and then see how much more we have in comparison and things like that. So it's really important to always like check yourself, check your privilege, that whole thing, and make sure that we are not perpetuating our own problems, like same kinds of problems, while we think we're fighting a bigger issue, if that makes sense. So I guess with that said, I would love to know how you think it's possible to create meaningful change through this kind of awareness, and what's your general like method of approaching this?
Yeah. I
guess
no,
like,
that's it. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm thinking more specifically in regards to like probably on the side of like the company or the corporate world, like how to create partnership, how to encourage this sort of conversation to really be more long lasting. Because I think that, yeah, starting as a conversation just one-on-one, like you and I, that's great, but it doesn't necessarily have the same scope to scale and to make a wide difference. So if we're looking at it on like a level in the corporate sphere, those in positions of management, and you did mention it in regards to like, you know, going to be changing the events and changing the lists, but more in regards to like, yeah, I guess large scale.
Large scale change for sure. I think definitely something that I always encourage like my community is to not just look at it like, oh, I got my foot in the door, I'm good. But it's like, how do I get a seat at the table? And that table particularly is like at an executive level, because if you're being honest, that's where majority of the biggest like changes are made. Like you said, like changing up your list of like individuals to feature or events to attend is something that you could do at a lower level, but it's probably not as big of an impact as you could make at an executive level. So I think definitely anybody who's in an executive position should definitely, the values have to be there for that core group. Actually, one interesting example is like at a past company that I worked at, our HR personnel, they were very much in tune with diverse inclusivity. They constantly were working towards it. But then when it came to our board of directors, and so she would attend those board of director meetings as well. But when it came to those meetings, they would always claim that we don't have a diversity inclusivity issue at all, because we quote unquote have women on our team. And so all the work that you're doing from like a lower level sometimes ends up like being a complete waste of time, unfortunately, because the higher up individuals do not care at the end of the day. And so making sure that your company, if you are at that kind of level, like an executive level, making sure that everybody on your team is on board with diverse inclusivity and equity as a core value of your company, and then measuring it the same way that you would measure your bottom line at the end of the day is really, really important. Installing there's a bunch of different initiatives that you could implement from a higher level, and then measuring that quarterly is important. And then also realizing that it's such a sensitive area, so it's not like you can really measure it from like a quantitative point of view. Most of the time it's not something that it's like, okay, like we have 10 Black people and like 3 Latinas and we're good. It's like, no, like you have to definitely look at it from a qualitative perspective. Make sure that you're anonymously like surveying your employees, and like just putting in those measures to make sure that you're hearing the voices of your employees and your clients and your community from like a social media perspective, and understanding like, are we actually catering to these communities? Are we actually hearing their voices? Are their needs being met? It's again a lot of work, and it's a lot of work a lot of companies want to like kind of like dodge or do the bare minimum of, but it is those companies that actually take this seriously, you can tell, and like it goes a long way, and it's directly connected to your bottom line 100%. I truly believe that. And so if nothing else motivates you, let that motivate you. Let the dollars speak for themselves. But so that's what I would say for that question.
Very good. And it's actually come up a few times as well in other conversations. It's like, at the end of the day, the results do speak for itself. If you nurture your team and you nurture your community, they will perform better. So it's not enough just to sit someone into the seat and say that's done, because there are issues of presenteeism, and people not feeling that they do have the right to voice or speak up in a meeting or whatever it may be. So it's not until we look at the qualitative data around that as well that we can gauge the full story about what's happening, and how we can be improving it for the next generation, and also moving forward.
Yeah, like one last thing. Sorry, I always remember things at the very end. But one thing that I actually read on Twitter, I think, is like someone tweeted it out and was like, I'm just trying to see something like how many people left their jobs because of a manager. And so many people, and a lot of people of color were answering me. Like I 100% left. I can even say I've left multiple times because of my managers. And so I think you like, let's say like a company is interested in hiring diverse individuals. You get them through the door, but then the manager does not care about that person whatsoever, is being super toxic, is making that person's life like a living hell, essentially. That just like all that effort, all the dollars spent to recruit that person is wasted at the end of the day. All the, like, that person could be such an expert, and you probably won't find someone like them for a very long time, because I've seen like how difficult it is to find top talent these days. And now you lost them simply because you couldn't welcome them and treat them equitably, fairly within the company. So in addition to what I already stated, like having good leadership, not just management, but leaders within your company, and like making sure that all of your managers understand like how to go about being good leaders and good managers for individuals of diverse backgrounds, and including that in the training is so important. I rarely ever see managers who actually like get proper training, like even on a quarterly basis. It's just, we hired you, you're a manager, go about your day. Like there should be some kind of training when it comes to that.
For sure. And it needs to probably be updated, because I feel like some of the training has been around for a long time and it may not apply.
It doesn't apply.
So I guess before, we're nearing the stage of wrapping up. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to add them to the Q&A. I'll try and respond accordingly. But just before we wrap up, I'd love to know, what do you currently specialize in with Muse Avenue, and what's sort of coming up next?
Yeah, so with Muse Avenue, right now it's kind of like on hold with the whole pandemic that's occurring. But usually we cater to Muslim women creatives who are of like the millennial generation. And essentially what I do and my team does is we put out content. So like articles that are featuring different types of successful Muslim women creatives, as well as like how-to based articles as well that speaks to different like creative backgrounds, so like photographers, writers, that kind of thing. So yeah, articles on our site. We also are very active on our Instagram and share a lot of like tips and like motivational quotes and just like stories on there as well. And right now we are doing our Instagram live series on self-care. So today, tomorrow, and as well Saturday. And then outside of that, once this whole pandemic, hopefully, fingers crossed, it's over, we'll be getting back to our regular schedule with like events as well as workshops. And so those kind of just serve as like events that like kind of bring our community together in like a face-to-face type of setting, where you can also try to like learn a new skill or grow within your current positions. So yeah, that's what we do.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. We have had a super last minute question, which we can try and run through. Sorry, I'm reading this on my phone, which is why my laptop's unreliable. So it just says, what is an inspiring example you can think of? Sorry, back. What is an inspiring example you can think of at the moment that really encompasses and embodies diversity and inclusivity that inspires you? I guess.
And inspiring. Can you repeat that one more time? Sorry.
So I guess the question is sort of like, what is an example that you can think of that inspires inclusivity and diversity, like maybe that you've seen in the media, or maybe that you've recently experienced, something along the lines that might be a nice takeaway.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. An inspiring, I'm trying to think of like a campaign or something that I saw, because I definitely find I'm always looking at campaigns like, did they get it right? Did they not? I think, okay, one that just popped into my mind, it's probably not my best example, but
Mm-hmm.
it's one that it's just top of mind right now.
Yeah.
Nike did like a campaign. I don't even know what it was for, to be honest, but it was
Mm-hmm.
like a campaign where they featured, oh, I think it was for Black History Month, but they featured a bunch of different like um, Black individuals, but they were all different. Like and by that I mean like there's still diversity within the Black community, and it showed. I remember there was like a Muslim girl wearing like a hijab on in there as well, which was like, oh, like this is so cool. And they Nike, like I have my reservations against them when it comes to like, you know,
Big things.
sweatshops and stuff
Yeah.
like that. But when it comes to diversity in the sense of like campaign wise, they're always doing such a good job
Mm-hmm.
representing different communities. And that I think that campaign stood out to me because one of the photographers that I follow was the creative director behind that. And I just like love the fact that diversity didn't mean just who's like being featured in the campaign, but also who's working on it in the background. And because like it just, that particular campaign just showed like it just felt so authentic, and it just felt so like, oh, okay, like yeah, that's such a beautiful campaign that really speaks to so many different communities. But knowing that like it was directed and like photographed by someone from that community just shows like how amazing like it came out, like why it came out that amazing. And so I think a key learning from that is diversity and inclusivity, like being pushed out like from a public standpoint is beautiful, great, but also making sure that in the background, the people working on it is also diverse and inclusive.
For sure. I think that's such a nice note to end this on. So thank you so much for having a chat with us today and sharing a
Of
bit more
course,
about
thank
your
you.
perspective on creativity and inclusivity and diversity. I think we've all
Yeah.
learned a lot about little things that we can be doing to continue this conversation and to spark real change. And if anyone is interested in finding you, where can we go?
Yeah, I mean, I live on Instagram. I respond to DMs. So definitely you can follow me on, on Muse Avenue's account, which is at Muse, MUSE AVE. And then my personal account is just my name. So at Sagal, SAGAL, and then Musa, MUSE. So yeah, you can follow me on either.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Sigal. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on board, and I look
Thank
forward
you.
to continuing this conversation on other platforms.
For sure. Thank you so much for having me. I love this topic, and I'm so grateful to have been a part of this. Thank you.
All right, thanks again, everyone. See you soon.
All right, bye.